She was the woman who had it all, the smile, the success, the strength. But behind closed doors, her body was fighting a battle that could take everything away, including her children. And when the truth came out, the person she once loved used it against her. Melody Shari had a way of making the impossible look effortless. She balanced motherhood, business ventures, and reality TV fame as if she'd been born to do it. To her supporters, she was the blueprint, the woman who walked away from a toxic marriage, rose from the wreckage, and built something powerful. She could walk into a room without speaking a word and still shift the air around her. But even the most unshakable people have a limit, and Melody had been teetering on hers far longer than anyone realized. For years, the warning signs had been there, quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. Her body was sending whispers long before it ever screamed. A slimmer frame that appeared so gradually people assumed it was a new fitness routine. A smile that, if you studied it carefully, didn't quite light up her eyes anymore. The subtle way her shoulders would slump when she thought no one was watching. Friends noticed her slipping out of events before they were over, citing an early morning or another meeting to prep for, but no one questioned it. Why would they? Melody had a well-earned reputation for being in demand. From the outside, it was easy to explain away. Overwork. Absolutely, she was running a business empire. Single motherhood. Of course, it came with its own brand of exhaustion. The grind of reality television, without question, it was a constant dance of schedules, interviews, filming, and maintaining the public version of herself. The people who cared for her figured she was simply burning the candle at both ends, as she always had. That was Melody, unstoppable, unshakable, unwilling to slow down. And Melody, she never gave them a reason to think otherwise. She kept the machine running, her hair always done, her wardrobe flawless, her conversations sharp and engaging. She was never without a plan, a project, or a purpose. Every room she entered, she filled with energy that felt effortless, even when it cost her everything to summon it. The curated image worked. No one looked deeper because they didn't think they had to. But underneath that shimmer was a woman, quietly carrying something heavy enough to crush her. She lived with it in silence. The way you carry a secret that you fear will redefine you if it gets out. By early 2024, the mask began to slip, not in the bright, demanding world of the spotlight, but in the quieter spaces that no one else could see. The moments when the cameras stopped rolling and the makeup was wiped away. In those hours, the truth came to the surface. The tiredness she'd once brushed aside had grown into something far more dangerous, a bone-deep exhaustion that didn't just weigh her down, it hollowed her out. It wasn't the kind of fatigue you cured with a nap or a weekend off. This was exhaustion that seeped into her bones, made her limbs heavy, made her body feel foreign. Brushing her hair became an uphill climb. Every stroke of the brush a reminder that even small tasks now came at a cost. Her skin began to rebel, flaring up in angry red patches that makeup could only hide for so long. Some mornings, she'd catch a reflection and hardly recognize herself, not because she looked worse, but because she no longer looked like the person she remembered being. Her once razor-sharp memory, the kind that could juggle contracts, school schedules, and filming commitments without missing a beat, started to glitch. She would pause mid-sentence, unable to recall the word she wanted, or walk into a room only to forget why she was there. And worst of all, her children began to notice. It started small, her oldest asking if she was okay when she left the dinner table early, or her youngest curling up beside her on the couch, sensing something was wrong even when she insisted she was just tired. Children have a way of detecting truths adults try to bury. They could feel it in the slower pace of her steps, in the way she winced when lifting a bag of groceries, in the way she leaned against the counter as if standing upright required effort. What had once been a personal, private battle was no longer hers alone. It was turning into a weight her family had to carry, too. And that realization pierced her deeper than any physical symptom ever could. She'd always prided herself on being the buffer between her children and the chaos of the adult world. She had fought hard ferociously to shield them from every storm life had thrown her way. And now, she was watching the one storm she couldn't control slip through her defenses. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she just needed to push through the next project, the next filming block, the next event. She'd rest later. She'd deal with whatever was happening, when there was time. But time never came because she never made it. She'd spent so many years living as if she were bulletproof that she didn't know how to stop, even when her body was screaming at her to. In the rare moments when she allowed herself to think about it, the fear crept in, not just fear for her health, but for her identity. Who was she if she wasn't the woman who could do it all? Who was she if she let people see the cracks? Vulnerability, in her world, wasn't simply uncomfortable, it was dangerous. She had learned early on that any perceived weakness could be twisted into a weapon, and so she carried her pain quietly, letting the world see only what she chose. The irony was, she knew how to read people. She could spot the subtlest shift in body language, could hear what was left unsaid, yet she banked on no one applying that same level of scrutiny to her. And, for the most part, she was right. Even those closest to her, the friends who'd known her before the cameras, didn't push too hard. Maybe they trusted her to be honest when it mattered. Maybe they didn't want to imagine that something might be seriously wrong, or maybe they, too, believed the public version of Melody, the one who never seemed to falter. But in those quiet hours, in the dim light of her bedroom, when the house had gone still, the truth pressed down on her, like a weight she couldn't shift. Her body was changing, betraying her in ways she didn't fully understand yet. The things she used to take for granted, energy, mental clarity, physical ease, were slipping through her fingers. And yet, she still got up every morning. She still made the breakfasts, packed the lunches, hustled the kids into the car. She still showed up for work, smiled for cameras, sat through meetings. She still made time to help with homework and tuck everyone in at night. That was the maddening part. The illness was stealing from her, but she refused to let it take the one role she valued. Above all being their mother, her children didn't know the full scope yet, but they knew enough to sense the shift. They became gentler with her, in small ways, offering to carry the grocery bags, suggesting they watch a movie instead of going out, curling up beside her without needing to be asked. Those moments were bittersweet. They reminded her that while her children were growing in empathy and awareness, they were also seeing a side of her she'd never wanted them to witness. By early 2024, the facade wasn't just cracking, it was shattering in slow motion. And Melody knew, deep down, that whatever was happening wasn't going to disappear if she ignored it. She could no longer explain away the symptoms as stress or overwork. Something was wrong. Something bigger than she wanted to admit. Still, she stayed silent because admitting it out loud felt like surrender. And surrender had never been part of her vocabulary. Melody had built her image on resilience. Vulnerability, she believed, wasn't part of the job description. In the world she knew, weakness could be weaponized. She'd seen how fast the internet could turn. One moment you're celebrated, the next you're the punchline. So she smiled through the pain, filmed through the fatigue, prayed through the fear. She kept telling herself she'd face it later, but later came sooner than expected. One evening, while cooking dinner, her body gave out completely. She collapsed in front of her children. Her daughter's trembling voice, "Mommy, are you okay?" cut deeper than anything her ex-husband had ever said or done. This wasn't just a scare, it was a turning point. Melody realized her silence wasn't just costing her health, it was putting at risk the very thing she had fought hardest to protect: her kids. Even after that night, she didn't rush to the public. She quietly canceled appearances, slowed down her deals, and stepped away from the constant online presence her fans were used to. The Instagram live stopped. Melody Mondays vanished. People assumed she was recharging, maybe off on a well-earned getaway. The truth was far heavier. The diagnosis came soon after. Lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease that plays by no rules and shows no mercy. It doesn't care about success, motherhood, or status. It attacks, and it keeps attacking. And Melody was already in the middle of the fight. Sharing that truth wasn't a strategy or a storyline, it was survival. Pretending to be fine had become more dangerous than honesty. When she finally decided to speak, it was in the simplest, rawest way possible. No makeup, no camera crew, just Melody on her couch, with shaking hands and a phone in front of her. She sat in silence for a moment, breathing, before saying softly, "I've been hiding something from y'all." Those words rippled through her fan base. What followed wasn't a performance, it was a moment stripped bare. "I've been diagnosed with lupus," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to say it without falling apart." It was the first time she had spoken those words outside her inner circle. Martel Holt, her ex-husband, and the father of her 4 children, had been part of her public narrative for years. Their history was complicated: love, betrayal, divorce, public spats, but nothing had prepared her for his next move. While she was focusing on rest, healing, and learning to live with lupus, he filed for full custody, not shared parenting. not adjustments to the schedule. Full custody of all 4 children. The reason? Her illness. When the court documents leaked, the words hit her like a punch to the chest. Martel claimed that her fatigue, her frequent medical appointments, and her ongoing treatments interfered with her ability to be a stable, reliable parent. He painted her lupus as a liability, suggesting it made her incapable of providing consistent care. The audacity of it was almost too much to process. This was the same woman who, even while battling pain and exhaustion, had never missed a school recital, a parent-teacher conference, or a single birthday celebration. The same mother who had kept their children grounded and protected during the most chaotic, public chapters of their family's life. She had been their constant, and now that very constancy was being questioned. And the worst part, this was exactly the nightmare she had feared from the moment of her diagnosis, that her vulnerability would be turned into a weapon against her. That someone would twist her illness into proof of weakness. Friends say that when she first read the filing, she didn't cry, not right away. She sat there, silent, processing the cold precision of the legal language. The way it reduced her to a list of supposed deficiencies. But later, in the privacy of her bedroom, she broke, not out of fear she'd lose her children. Deep down, she believed the truth would stand. But because of who was holding the knife, this was the man who had once promised to stand beside her in sickness and in health. The man who had seen her at her most vulnerable during pregnancies, postpartum nights, and sleepless illnesses. The man who knew exactly how hard she fought to keep their children's lives stable after their marriage collapsed. And now, he was using the very thing that had nearly killed her to try and take away the only thing she valued more than her own life. It wasn't just a custody battle. It was a betrayal layered on top of every other wound. And for Melody, that cut deeper than lupus ever could. Melody didn't blast him online or fire off cryptic posts. But behind the scenes, friends say she wept for days, not out of fear of losing custody, but because the man who once vowed to protect her had chosen to turn her illness into ammunition. That betrayal, she said, cut deeper than lupus ever could. The courtroom felt cold. The air heavy, every glance across the aisle charged with history. Sitting across from Martel once, her partner, now her opponent, was surreal. His team leaned on speculation, pointing to her absence from social media, her reduced brand work, even cherry-picked clips from their reality show. One lawyer implied her emotional state made her home unpredictable. Her team came armed with proof. Teacher letters, school reports glowing with praise, statements from family, friends, and doctors who confirmed lupus did not diminish her parenting. In fact, one physician wrote that hiding her illness had caused more harm than the illness itself. They showed that she kept routines, showed up for her children, and shielded them from the worst of her pain. When Melody spoke, she didn't tremble. She talked about nights she'd run fevers but still packed lunches and got the kids to school. About planning treatments around their activities so they never felt her absence. Yes, she admitted, she was tired sometimes, desperately so, but that didn't make her incapable. If anything, it made her fight harder to be present. Then the judge asked the question that would decide it all. Do you believe your condition affects your ability to raise your children safely? Melody didn't hesitate. No, Your Honor, I believe it's made me fight harder to live for them. The stillness in the room said more than any argument ever could. The verdict came, joint custody, with Melody retaining primary physical custody. A win on paper, but the emotional toll was staggering. She left the courtroom not triumphant, but drained in every sense. Her symptoms flared badly during the trial, stress taking its pound of flesh. In the quiet that followed, she began something she hadn't done in years. She truly took care of herself. Not the performance of healing, but the real, deliberate act of it. She stepped back from filming, declined offers, built a schedule that allowed her body to rest. Therapy became non-negotiable. Boundaries stopped being optional. Privately, she began documenting her journey, not for likes, not for validation, and certainly not for the applause of strangers, but for herself. It started in the quiet hours, when the kids were asleep and the house was still. She'd pick up her phone and hit record, speaking into the dark like it was a trusted friend. Some nights, her voice shook as she described the weight of fatigue pressing down on her chest. Other nights, she whispered about small victories a day without pain, a laugh shared with her children, a moment when she felt almost like her old self again. Alongside the voice memos came journal entries, pages filled with unfiltered honesty. She wrote about the frustration of feeling trapped in a body that could betray her without warning, about the fear of not knowing when the next flare would come, and about the guilt that clung to her on days she couldn't do everything she wanted for her children. But there was beauty in those pages. 2 descriptions of sunrise walks on mornings she felt strong enough. The sound of her kids' laughter drifting down the hall. The relief of making it through a day without breaking down. She also began collecting snippets of her life on camera, not staged content, but raw glimpses. Her eldest helping to braid her hair when her arms were too tired. Her youngest reading to her in bed during a flare. The quiet comfort of her mother cooking in the kitchen when she didn't have the energy. These weren't moments she planned to post online at the time. They were proof for herself that she was still living. Still finding meaning in the middle of the mess. And then, one day, she realized she was ready to share again. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't. Not because her story now had a tidy ending, it didn't. But because she had reached a point where hiding felt heavier than speaking. That's when the idea for the documentary began to take shape. It wouldn't be about scandal or petty drama. This was about endurance. About what it means to carry pain and purpose at the same time. About raising children while navigating an unpredictable, unforgiving illness. About standing back up after public betrayal. About the quiet work of forgiving yourself and, in time, forgiving others, not to excuse them, but to free yourself from the weight of their actions. The series, as she envisioned it, wouldn't glamorize her illness or paint her as a tragic figure. It would show the truth, the good days and the terrible ones. The moments when she laughed so hard her ribs hurt, and the moments when she curled up in bed, unable to move. It would explore the reality of boundaries, the difficult decisions to turn down opportunities, and the resilience required to rebuild a life on new terms. Melody wanted viewers, especially women, especially mothers, to see that strength doesn't always look like powering through without breaking. Sometimes it looks like slowing down. Sometimes it looks like asking for help. Sometimes it's in admitting that you can't do everything, but you'll do everything you can for the people who matter most. For her, the act of telling this story was not just about inspiring others, it was about reclaiming her own narrative. Too many chapters of her life had been shaped by other people's words, other people's agendas, and the public's assumptions. This time, every frame, every sentence, every piece of the story would come from her. Melody Shari isn't hiding anymore. She's not just living with lupus, she's living on her terms. And her story, it's not tidy, it's not wrapped in a bow, it's raw, it's complicated, it's threaded with both pain and joy. And, most importantly, it's hers. She knows there will be people who only see the struggle, who shake their heads at the difficult days. But she also knows there will be those who see the fight in her eyes, the tenderness in her voice when she speaks about her children, the refusal to let an illness define the fullness of her life. Those are the ones she's speaking to. Those are the ones who will understand that survival, in its truest form, is an act of power.